Great to have you on again. Everyone's got their opinion on it. Nathan McSweeney out for Sam Konstas. Right or wrong decision in your opinion?
Oh, it's a tough one. I think it's not right from a consistency perspective, purely because I think when you look at the way this series has played out, I think there's a number of batsmen in both teams at the top order that have struggled against the moving ball on, in some tricky conditions across the three tests. So from that perspective, then I'd say, I don't agree with it, because I think in that last test match at the Gabba, the top three of Australia really allowed Steve Smith and Travis Head to do what they did in the middle order by absorbing a lot of the pressure against Bumrah and the new ball. I think each of them faced 50-plus balls, and that contributed to an Australian. Even though it was a draw, Australia were well on top of that test, obviously with all the rain. So, yeah, from that perspective, but also I understand why they picked the young kid Konstas. He was in the frame before the start of the summer, and they obviously feel like they need to change things at the top of the order. But I don't think that Nathan McSweeney deserved to pay the price for, a quiet three tests when there's a number of players across both teams that have found it hard.
Kat, great to be talking to you. Merry Christmas. You got to see Nathan McSweeney firsthand last night. Actually, you're doing an unbelievable job. Are you getting any sleep?
Yeah, thankfully pretty good. I'm used to it at home, mate. The boys are up early at home, so I'm used to these weird hours. But
it's unbelievable.
Yeah, look, I was really impressed with the youngster last night. He responded in, the best possible fashion, and we spoke to him on comms for a bulk of the fielding innings, and his attitude towards it all spoke highly about his character. There was no whinging or carrying on or anything like that. He basically just copped it on the chin. He'd be disappointed internally, but he's gone out there and basically given it a big stuff you to the selectors, because what we witnessed last night, and albeit, it's a totally different format, different conditions, and obviously not having to face Jasprit Bumrah. He played beautifully and engineered a heat victory when they looked like they were in trouble at a couple of times throughout the chase. But it was, he set the tempo nicely, and he was helped out by his mate Matt Renshaw, who batted perfectly as well. And the Heat had a very good win.
Yeah, I'll get on to Renshaw in a second, but do you reckon that franks his credentials now as he's an Australian quality player in the method in which he has responded to a disappointing selection?
Yeah, look, I think that was the reason he got picked in the first place. And I think you only have to look back a month or so ago. He stood out in the A games. He was clearly the best player with the best credentials out of all those guys when they had the bat off up in Mackay. And, he stood head and shoulders above the rest, technically and from a temperament perspective, given the pressure that was on all of those guys, Renshaw and Bancroft and Harris and Konstas, they were all playing. So, there's a reason why he was picked in the first place, and he's had a very good couple of years for South Australia. He leads well. He obviously led the Heat to the BBL title last year. So he's got a very good all-round package. I thought he was excellent in the field during his three tests. But the problem was, he came up against a red-hot Jasprit Bumrah, and it's been a tough initiation for him. So I don't think he needs to be judged too harshly just yet, because plenty of players have come before him that have struggled against a certain bowler at the top of the order. And he'll be better for the experience. He'd just be disappointed with the way this has played out, because I don't think he deserved to be cast aside just yet. But it's a great opportunity for the young kid who's obviously got a bit about him as well.
Yeah, and Matt Renshaw obviously played a key innings last night, 54 of 27, pretty explosive. And one of the things, I got to see him in the Shield game where Queensland just beat Victoria at the MCG, and he's batting superbly. He doesn't hit the ball to field as much at all. Where is he at on his journey for higher honours as well? Because, he is an experienced, he's had a taste of Australian cricket, obviously at the top of the order. Where do you think he fits in?
Yeah, look, he should be knocking on the door and banging down it with, a huge amount of runs. And I know he probably hasn't made the volume of runs that he would have liked, but the recent signs have been pretty good. And then last night, he changed the whole momentum of the game, where strikers were well on top after sort of 5 overs, and then came out and did it with a lot of composure. There wasn't, there's probably one indiscriminate shot that I remember in missed timing off Lloyd Pope that just sort of skewed over cover. But otherwise, his placement was spot on. His power was very good. And what I was impressed with was he used his feet to the spinners beautifully and hit them straight or over mid-wicket. So there will be spin challenges coming up, particularly in Sri Lanka and the West Indies in the middle of next year. But he's just got to keep piling on the runs, because I think when we saw him play for Australia a few years ago when he debuted, he looked like a natural opener. He was happy to bat periods of time and bat long periods of time. So, yeah, he's just got to make sure that he makes it irresistible and outscores everyone else and just make sure the selectors have his name next in the queue.
Speaking to Simon Katich, SEN cricket commentator. Just going back to the decision to drop Nathan McSweeney. Simon, as you mentioned, the top three for Australia have really struggled against Jasprit Bumrah. So why do you think the selectors think Sam Konstas is going to do any better?
Yeah, it's a good question because I know all the talk is around having more positive intent, and I think, well, that's all well and good, and it's certainly something that they have to, be mindful of because we were critical of it in Perth. The problem is against someone like Bumrah, intent's not just about blazing him for fours because he doesn't bowl many bad balls. So a lot of that intent has to be about rotating strike and being able to defend really well because you're not going to be able to play within an intent if you're not there after the 10th over and you've been knocked over early on. So that's the challenge for all of these guys. And I think we saw it in that second innings in Brisbane. Australians came out with real positive intent to try and score quickly. And look what happened. End up being 7 for 80 in no time. And it's not easy to do against a red ball that moves around off the seam on a wearing wicket, which the Gabba was starting to become with cracks. So it's easier said than done. And I think that was a great example of the top orders going to have to be really careful and mindful of how they go about it because you're not going to score many runs if you're trying to take him on off a length because that's why he's so good. He doesn't allow you to hit him off a length. I know this young kid's got a lot of potential and a lot of ability, but it will be a big challenge because not many guys around the world have been able to do that to that quality of bowling.
Kat, what do you make of India's dealings with the Australian media over the last few days? Is it a bit of siege mentality about the way they're going about it? And I've just heard, as Adam White came into the studio here, he just said they cancelled the media game. It was going to be the Australian media versus the India media at the Junction Oval yesterday. They've cancelled it. So they ended up having centre wicket practice. So all sorts of things are unfolding. What's your take on that?
That sounds a bit petty, cancelling the media game. I mean, come on, really. It's supposed to be for fun and there's supposed to be some camaraderie between the groups. They obviously spend a fair bit of time away throughout the year covering their teams and it's disappointing to hear that because you'd like to think that, whatever's unfolded, they can hopefully smoke the peace pipe and get on with it. But, disappointing to hear that. But, I guess because the pressure point's building and this is a huge test. I mean, India would have said, if we could come to Melbourne 1-1, they would take that every day of the week, given the 3 tests were at venues that Australia thought they'd probably have a massive advantage and did have a big advantage. I think that maybe it's just that siege mentality around, wanting to make sure that they're fully prepared and leaving no stone unturned with how they want to play this test and not giving too much away about it.
Simon, would you consider, we know Scott Boland's coming in for Josh Hazlewood, we know McSweeney's out for Konstas. Would you consider any other changes to the 11 for this test match or just leave as is?
Look, I've been saying for a couple of tests, Mitch Marsh has not been able to bowl the volume of overs that, I think everyone expected of him, given the conditions and given, he is a wicket taker and we saw that in Perth. He bowled well on day one, took some key wickets and then struggled to back up. And obviously the Aussie hierarchy know better than we do around where his fitness is at. But for him to bowl 2 overs the other day after Josh Hazlewood went down, that to me indicates that something's not 100% right with him. Because the conditions were conducive to him bowling more. And look, at the end of the day, Beau Webster deserves to be in that squad. He's done very well for Tassie in the last few years. He's a genuine all-rounder, given what his role is for Tassie, and he plays that dual role with bat and ball. And I think that's where, Marsh has got to be able to bowl more. Otherwise, this Australian team, Boland coming back in is a big plus because I thought he was good in Adelaide. But one of the strengths of this Australian team has been keeping that bowling attack on the park for a long period of time. And if that starts to fray, then, that all-rounder spot will be looked at because there's no doubt the Stark and Cummins the other day in particular had to shoulder probably more of the load than they needed to.
Is there an option, just given the MCG wicket is a bit lively, it might be a bit lower scoring and it may not be such a heavy workload on the bowlers. Do you think it might be a Marsh for who's not contributing quite so much at the moment, but maybe a Josh Inglis? Does he come into that calculation in that middle order to play that sort of dynamic role with the bat?
Well, the thing is, I mean, when you look at his form for WA is outstanding at the start of the year in red ball cricket, and he's a very good player of spin as well. And so I think the only thing that's counted against him is the fact that he does bat in that sort of 5-6 position. So realistically, given Alex Carey's form as well, I mean, he's in as good a form as anyone. He looks like he's playing as well as someone like Travis Head, who's been dominant in this series. So, yeah, it's probably Marsh's spot. That's the one that will be under scrutiny purely because he hasn't got the volume of runs. He played well in the second innings in Perth, but since then he hasn't really looked like it. And if he's not contributing the ball, then they'll have to look at what their best option is, because we know that guys like Scott Boland can bowl long spells and shoulder the workload. And if Nathan Lyon bowls more in Melbourne, then who knows, they might consider that option.
It's funny, isn't it, Simon? The way we're talking and there's so many question marks about the Australian team, you'd think we're zip 3 down. But it's 1-1 and we've been the better side in 2 of the test matches.
Yeah, we certainly have. And I think that's the thing that got forgotten a bit in Brisbane. Because we got, into trouble in that second innings setting up the game, we're still well ahead of that test match given the way the wicket was playing. It was a new ball wicket and that chase wouldn't have been easy. But I think in terms of what has happened since Perth, I think the Australians have responded beautifully. And I think, the thing that stands out is that the hundreds are setting games up for both teams. We saw that in Perth with Jasprit and KL Rahul played well, and so did Kohli. But since then, because the bowling attack has got back on top of that Indian batting order, Travis Head's runs and Smith's runs have played a key role in Australia getting back in the series. So in my mind, it's that top 4 in the engine room that can basically do the job in Melbourne, and whoever does that best will probably get the right result.
Yeah, it's perfectly set up. Simon, as always, thanks for your time. Have a fantastic Christmas, and we can't wait to hear you and the team on Boxing Day.
Likewise, guys. Thank you.
Go well, Kat.
Simon